You should know it appears the Daniel Penny jury in New York City is hung. They say they cannot come to an agreement on the second-degree manslaughter charge. I'm going to put off talking about this. I was going to talk about it later anyway. I want to put it off, though, see how this plays out, see how the judge handles it. But you do need to know this breaking news out of the gate. Where I want to begin, though, is with something there are a number of stories together that I actually think I being a professional, I'm going to weave these stories together. And we've got to begin again with the murder of Brian Thompson, the United Health Insurance CEO. There are relevant aspects to a bunch of different stories to tie together. But to begin with, I got to play you this from CBS News.
This morning, we still do not know why the CEO of United Healthcare was murdered on Wednesday here on the streets of New York. But some of us have been really surprised by the reaction online. Many have shared their very deep frustration with the health insurance industry.
I have never seen Americans so united on something as I have over the last 24 hours.
Okay, now they play a number of social media clips of people venting, being happy that this guy died. This is Gayle King, and now I'm getting back to the panel discussion for this.
Yeah, she speaks for a lot of people there, but this really isn't about this tragedy. The videos of the doctors talking about their frustrations with insurers are from before the shooting.
I had billed $12 and change for a patient's.
Now, you see what they're doing is they're now making this about a larger issue than the murder of the CEO. So we're getting all the doctors expressing frustrations and now the panel.
Understand why so many people are so very angry is CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder. She's editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News. Really glad to have you here, especially on this particular day. Listen, we can all agree that the system is broken. We all agree on that. But it seems that people are having a hard time separating the broken system for the person. The fact that so many people are gleeful is the word that this has happened to this man just sort of stuns me. How did we get here?
Look, vigilante justice is not okay.
Yeah.
We do have a country of law and order where there are systems to address these issues, which we can talk about more. But look, to quote Al Sharpton, the rent is too damn high. Healthcare costs are too damn high.
Okay, it wasn't Al Sharpton that said that. It was a different black man. But, okay, here's the thing, though. Yeah, people are gleeful. What's happening here, and CBS News is playing to this, and CBS News is part of the problem, is what's happening, particularly among the progressives, whether on the left or right. There are progressives on the right as well. These are deeply narcissistic people. What is happening, to answer Gayle King's question, what is happening is ever since COVID, we have allowed this manifestation of mentally ill narcissists to rule the conversations of this country. The Democratic Party itself has been taken over by these mentally ill narcissists, and it led to their electoral defeat. There's some data out today that you should know. It turns out that a significant portion of men who voted in the 2024 election felt bullied by their female spouse or partner into who to vote for. In fact, more men felt bullied by women than women felt bullied by men, according to the data, which is the exact opposite of the Kamala Harris ad. Remember, Kamala Harris put out an ad that showed that women overwhelmingly felt bullied by men. And there was an entire ad campaign about men pushing women to go to the polls and vote for Trump. And when they got in there, the women winked at each other, voted for Harris, and came out and, oh, yeah, honey, we did exactly what you wanted. So turns out it's the men. But the mentally ill, neurotic women of America insisted that they were the ones who were being bullied and insisted you had to vote for Harris. Turns out the mentally ill, neurotic women were driving the conversation of the Harris campaign and Democratic strategy and cost them the election. And now we're seated on display with the murder of a CEO, where we're not allowed to take the news of an innocent man who is a husband and father who is gunned down in the streets of New York City. No, you're not allowed to say he was innocent because he was a healthcare executive. As an aside here, one of the things that none of these people want to grab hold of and understand is how this is Obamacare. The Republicans never repealed Obamacare. Americans' views on healthcare have dramatically descended since passage of Obamacare. No one in the media will talk about it because everyone in the media was complicit in helping the Democrats pass Obamacare. They've defended Obamacare. They haven't wanted reform of Obamacare. But all of these people on the left complaining about healthcare in America, they're the ones who wanted the system that we have now. And they claim, no, actually, we want universal health care so it can be an unelected government bureaucrat doing what Brian Thompson did, denying claims. What are you going to do, start killing the bureaucrats then? This is narcissism. It is a narcissism on display. It's the same thing with the trans community. You got a group of mentally ill narcissists who've decided they need everyone to pay attention to them, so they shave most of their head, leave the rest of it alone and dye it purple, put in a nose ring, declare their pronouns it, zer, and demand that you bow before them and respect them. It is a mentally ill narcissism. Then it is, by the way, it's also not a coincidence that the most vocal people cheering on the murder of a healthcare CEO are the people cheering on the murder of Jews, cheering on the trans community and the mutilation of children, and cheering on every left-wing groupthink out there. It is a narcissistic hive mind of progressive mentality out there. These white kids who are protesting against Israel, they're not concerned about the Palestinians. They're concerned about feeling involved and being change agents. They want to feel good about themselves. They don't care about the Palestinians. God knows gays for Palestine are never actually going to Palestine. One, you can't find it on the map because it's not real. And two, if they actually went to Gaza, they'd be murdered for being gay. They're absolutely narcissistic people, and they're trying to run our society. And by the way, the media is feeding into this. I want to play you this exchange with Kate Baldwin on, I'm sorry, it's Brianna Keeler on CNN with Christian Wagner. You should know Christian Wagner is one of the greatest conservatives in the pro-life community. Hands down, one of the best people out there. Christian Wagner is fantastic. With the Alliance Defending Freedom, she is regularly vilified as some sort of terrorist by the left. Christian Wagner is brilliant, and she has this wonderful exchange with Brianna Keeler. But listen to Brianna Keeler in this conversation.
I think a lot of people are confused about this issue. They don't know where they stand on it. But where is the room for a conversation about this?
I love that we're having one right now in terms of a conversation, and that's what was at issue today. What kid, what girl knows whether she's going to want to have a baby long term, or what testosterone will do to her uterus, or that she will increase her risk of heart attacks by taking these drugs?
Some of them do.
No.
None of them.
No, I don't think
None of them do.
85% what we know from the science, and again, it's about not putting ideology over evidence, and that's what's happening here.
Brianna Keeler posits that there are girls out there who know immediately they don't want to have children, or know immediately that they're actually boys trapped in girls' bodies. And we're talking kids here, children. And she just assumes that there must be that. I mean, that's what the left says. The narcissists on the left say it. So it must be true. And Christian Wagner's like, actually, no, we know what the data says. It's not true. And by the way, my oldest is now 19. When she was 4 years old, she set up her piggy bank and started saving her coins. She wanted to go to SCAD, the Savannah College of Art Design. Ever since she was little, she has been interested in fashion and art, and she happens to be a very good artist. I don't say that as proud dad. I say that as guilty dad, because she was actually so good as a child in art that I assumed she was copying from other people. I mean, really, it was so good. I was like, there's no way my kid is capable of doing that, and yet my kid was capable of doing that. And she wanted to go to SCAD. And then one day, a switch flipped, and she said, you know what? I actually want to make rockets and blow up Chinese communists. And I was like, God bless you, child. She also decided that being my kid and being conservative and Christian, she wouldn't be a good fit at SCAD. And so she decided she wanted to be an engineer. She's actually now exploring options in college beyond engineering, chemistry, and data analytics, business stuff. But she grew out of the phase of I'm going to go. She's still a brilliant artist. And, sadly, I think the progressive folks that she's encountering in the art department might be like ruining her desire to be in art. I wish she'd still do it, but in any event, she changed her mind. And yet the left tells us that a little kid is not going to change their mind. We might as well go on and chop them up in various ways. It's narcissism. It's the same level of narcissism of the people cheering on the CEO being murdered. They don't care about his wife. They don't care about his kids. They care about themselves. They care about themselves. And their narcissism is guiding so much of the progressive community right now. Think about this in education. They don't care that your inner city child is getting a terrible education because they care greatly about themselves and they feel like they've got to defend progressive public education. And in their need to defend progressive public education, they don't care about the outcome that your kid is getting. They care about their desire to defend it. They don't actually care about your jobs and job creation. They care about themselves. They want you to be forced into a vehicle you don't want because they don't care about you. They care about themselves. It is progressive narcissism through a manipulating press that puts them on display, where CBS News can take a story about a murdered CEO and turn it into a story of aggrieved people over insurance. A man is dead and they don't really care, except to the extent that progressives get to vent about their insurance problems and pay no attention to the fact that they're the ones who wanted the problems. They wanted Obamacare. This is what they got. They got it because they wanted it, and now they're deeply malcontented by what they themselves desired. And you can't point that out to them. God, no. They'll be super defensive about it. We wanted universal health care. But this was your compromise to try to get there, and now you don't like it. These people thought they'd never lose an election again on top of all of it, and they're deeply discombobulated. So what have they done? They've left Twitter to go to Blue Sky, where people like James Carville have for years now been telling the left, you've got to get out of the faculty lounge. And instead, the faculty all went to Blue Sky and wrapped all the activists into the faculty lounge so they can keep their groupthink hive mind bubble together, where they can all be neurotic narcissists continuing to drag down the Democratic Party. They may never win an election again. I got to tell you, though, that if you are cheering on the death of a healthcare CEO because you don't like health insurance, you actually are the problem. You are suffering some level of narcissism and mental illness. If that is your first reaction, that this man got what he deserved on behalf of everyone who's fought insurance, you are mentally ill. And that's most of the Democratic Party right now. I got to make sure everybody is aware of what's actually happening, because I don't actually know that most of you really appreciate what's going on with some of the talking points out there. So there is a talking point that Joni Ernst, the senator from Iowa, is trying to sabotage Pete Hegseth's nomination. Now, she's withholding her support so far. They've had some discussions, but she's not publicly committing to voting for him. People are like, see, that's sabotage. No. That's her prerogative as a senator, and that's not what people are talking about. There's a phenomenon that is new to social media. It happens all over the place, but for those of you on Twitter, one of the things that has started happening over the past couple of years is on the right and the left, and particularly among right-wing circles now, there are groups that will pay for engagement and talking points. So they will pay people with large followings to take a position, and those people who are paid bounce each other's paid positions off, and they're not disclosed as paid, which, by the way, is against the law, but they don't care. They don't think they're ever going to get caught. And they begin to seed an echo chamber. This happens on the left as well. So many of the talking points of the left are done in the same fashion. So the two talking points now that are on the right that I believe are being paid to be seated are, one, Joni Ernst is to blame for sabotaging Pete Hegseth's nomination, and number two, the military-industrial complex, Boeing and Lockheed. I saw someone say the other day, it's not a coincidence that the people most likely to object to Hegseth are the biggest Boeing Lockheed owners. Well, yeah, they're on the Armed Services Committee. Everyone who sits on the Armed Services Committee are the biggest recipients of donations from Lockheed and Boeing. This isn't hard. It's not a conspiracy. What's actually going on here is not the sabotage of Pete Hegseth by Joni Ernst. It's the intended sabotage of Joni Ernst. I don't have a dog in the fight. But just so you understand, Joni Ernst was on the short list to be defense secretary, and people who identify primarily as MAGA, they don't like her for a lot of reasons, some of them very good. She, for example, has supported women in the draft. I think it's a terrible idea. but she supported it. She's also been a Republican who hasn't necessarily opposed trans soldiers. Again, a terrible idea. So what's actually going on here in these stories about Joni Ernst sabotaging Pete Hegseth is these people themselves are actually trying to sabotage Joni Ernst if Hegseth drops out. But you weave in the military-industrial complex and stuff, and it allows people who support Hegseth to begin to yet again believe they are the victims of something. And keeping people believing they're victims is highly profitable for a lot of people. What's actually happening here is Hegseth has problems. He has problems in his background, and there actually are questions as to whether or not he's qualified to run the biggest bureaucracy in the federal government, one that is badly in need of reform. And some of the people who would give him the benefit of the doubt privately aren't sure he's up for the job of an institution that badly needs reform. A lot of these senators, though, will give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. But I cannot emphasize to you, I get people who are calling me who are mad at me. They say, well, so-and-so and so-and-so is saying something on Twitter. Yes, they are parroting the hive mind, and now they've got you parroting the hive mind, and you and maybe not they know that this started as a paid operation to get people to parrot these talking points. You're not actually thinking for yourself here. I know you think you're thinking for yourself, but you're actually not. You're actually parroting the paid placement of these attacks on social media. Be wary when the hive all goes in one direction. You should probably stand back and just watch and see what happens. I think that Hegseth, if he stays in, and I hope he does, I think he probably will be able to persuade these Republicans, because here's ultimately the thing that's happening. There are a lot of people in the Senate who actually don't think Hegseth is qualified. Not because the military-industrial complex says them so, but because he ran 2 nonprofits and was an anchor at Fox News. The end. They don't want to publicly oppose Donald Trump. So what they're doing is they are smearing Hegseth, trying to pressure him to drop out. If Hegseth holds on to Christmas, they're going to realize they have to do one of 2 things. They either have to support him or they have to publicly say, I'm not backing him. And many of them don't want to waste their political capital on a fight against Hegseth. They have other people they would rather oppose publicly. So they're trying to sabotage him. Now, all he's got to do is hold on. All Donald Trump has to do is continue to stand with Hegseth. And then if he gets the position and the office is too big for him, he will be exposed and he will be booted. And a lot of people will blame other factors. In fact, you'll see these paid placement things happen again to claim that there are ancillary forces that forced him out, when actually it will be Donald Trump picked someone who lots of senators said were unqualified. They turned out to be right, but God forbid anyone remembers that people were saying, hey, maybe this guy isn't cut out for the job. But we should let him be in the job, let him rise or fall in the job, not subjecting to a bunch of character assassinations. If he holds on, he'll probably be confirmed at this point. He doesn't have the votes, but he can get the votes. Let's see how this plays out. Just remember, a lot of the hive mind you're seeing on social media began as someone paying a group of people to seed the idea, and then the lemmings did what lemmings do. Now, I don't want you to be a lemming. I want you to be a thoughtful person. I want you to think about the smell in your house. Does it stink? Do you have dirty diapers? Do you have a wet dog? Do you have a litter box? Do you smoke in the house? Do you have, like, we don't have an exhaust fan in our kitchen, it's broken. And so if you fry something in the kitchen, the house can smell. If so, you can get 3 Eden Pure Thunderstorms and save $200. Not only do they get rid of dust, dander, pollen, they get rid of odors, and they get rid of bacteria and viruses. 99.9%. You get 3 of them and save $200. All you do is go to EdenPureDeals.com. EdenPureDeals.com. If you go there, you put in Erick3, ERICK3, right on the front page of the website. You'll see a discount code box. Put in Erick3, my name, and the number 3, no space, and you will get 3 Eden Pure Thunderstorms. You'll save $200. You'll get them for less than $200. You'll begin to wipe out odors in your house, your basement, your upstairs, your downstairs. I keep one in my travel bag. You can hold it in your hand. It is useful, it is powerful, and it will eliminate odors, bacteria, and viruses in your home. They're small, but you put one downstairs, you put one upstairs, you put one in on your main floor, you put one in your RV, wherever, they're going to work. EdenPureDeals.com, the discount code Erick3. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is a big proponent of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and so am I. I'm going to go off on a tangent here and then come back to my primary point. I have deep doubts. Stop it, Jeremiah. Stop it. She wants another motorcycle. Sorry, tangent from the tangent. Buddy of mine texted me and said, you should get your wife a new motorcycle. Oh, she wants one. If one of you wants to give me $15,000, I'm happy to buy it for her, but otherwise, no. I have my doubts that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be able to cut $1 trillion or $2 trillion from the government. The main reason I have my doubts is this. When you add up all the waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, not necessarily trillions of dollars, but additionally, it's going to be very hard to consolidate government programs. Now, I wish them well. I don't want to discourage them. I hope they can find $3 trillion. But I'm just not sure what they'll find. But let's say they find $500 billion. That's still $500 billion. Good for them. They should do it. They should be encouraged. And in fact, there are some centrist Democrats, now they're liberals, they're just not progressives, who are on board the whole idea that surely there are parts of government that can be consolidated and that can be cut. We do have duplicate government programs. We don't need all the government programs that we have. So to the extent that they can do that, I think it's a good thing. And one of the things we're going to find, and one of the things they're going to run into, is there are constituency groups out there that want nothing cut. And those constituency groups are on the left, and those constituency groups have easy access to the media. You think of the term gender-affirming care, if you will. I realize this sounds like this is a tangent from the tangent of the other tangent, but it's not. And Jeremiah, text me your address since you're listening. Gender-affirming care is a PR phrase developed by the left because they wanted to get away from phrases like transvestites that had a pejorative meaning in cultural shows. You see TV shows where someone is a quote unquote transvestite. That's a the cross-dresser, what have you. It's typically the butt of jokes or not the good character in the show. And they wanted to get rid of, tied to that, sex change operation because they invested a whole lot in the idea that gender is separate from sex. So if gender is separate from sex, and now, by the way, they've muddied the water. Now, I mean, even if you read the transcript of the arguments before the Supreme Court the other day, they've merged back in that sex and gender are the same thing, that someone can change their sex, their birth sex versus their change, and they use gender and sex more and more interchangeably, having said they were separate things. But gender-affirming care is the PR phrase in the same way undocumented immigrant is a PR-driven phrase that the media so easily absorbed into its vernacular. The left-wing Axios the other day, a national news site, talked about Supreme Court seems unlikely to grant gender-affirming care. It's not gender-affirming care. It's a sex change procedure. But sex change procedure doesn't sell well with the American public. They need something that sounds positive. You're affirming. We all want to be affirming people. So they call it gender affirming care. And it's PR spin that the media so easily embraces. So to my point on cutting government, there are so many constituencies on the left that have a vested interest in the government never cutting anything. And the same media that so easily will use phrases like unhoused, an undocumented immigrant, undocumented migrant, gender affirming care, they are going to embrace the snot out of whatever left-wing group comes on and says, oh my gosh, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, they're going to drive us out of business and this is terrible. People will die. Think about all the media stories about net neutrality. There's not a person on national television in the media who is smart enough to understand net neutrality, and yet they did stories on it claiming that if the FCC denies net neutrality, people will die. People will be without the internet. Big business shall destroy. The FCC under Donald Trump killed net neutrality. The Democrats have tried to bring it back. They haven't been quite successful in it. The internet's doing fine. Or tax cuts. Remember, if they cut taxes, people are going to die. The media wanted to do horror stories on what it would mean for people. They wanted to do fawning portrayals of the poor union worker who wasn't going to be paid union wage, and he and his family were going to be bankrupted out of their $5 million home and have to drive a Chevy instead of a Mercedes, and poor, pitiful them. The level of sympathy for left-wing talking points in the press is one thing Republicans have always had to be mindful of. It shouldn't stop us from what we want to do, but we got to be on our A game when we do it, because you're going to have these fawning stories. I guarantee you this now gets from the tangent, out of the tangent, back out of that tangent to the main point. I am a professional. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, is saying, government bureaucrats, it is time to go back to work.
We take over in January, and until then, the big government Democrats are still in charge, and they're spending money, in our view, recklessly. And so, yes, we've had a lot of discussions over the last couple of days about what our authority would be to claw some of that back and to stop it. It's a serious challenge, and we need to stop it and expose what's happening. That's what this effort will be about going forward. There is an enormous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. And I think everyone knows that intuitively. And so the efforts here, both with our subcommittees that are being created here and with the DOGE effort itself, will be to explore that, to investigate it, and lay it bare for the American people to see. I think that's how we'll begin to bring about the change that we all need. So this is an ongoing effort. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, some labor unions are already fighting back. They've already signed contracts to try and get this, that they could be able to work from home, things like that. Your reaction?
Well, there was a report that came out today. I don't know if you all have seen it, but someone did a little survey of how many federal employees are actually working in the office. By one estimate, it may be about 1% if you don't count the security personnel that are covering these buildings. That is absurd, and it's not something the American people will stand for. And so one of the first things that I think you'll see is a demand from the new administration and from all of us in Congress that federal workers return to their desks and get back to the work that they're supposed to be doing. I think that is common sense. What you're going to see here, the overriding theme here, is a return to common sense and a return to accountability and efficiency in government. I think that's going to serve the people well. There'll be a lot more to tell you all in the days ahead. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Good for him. Yeah, the government unions, by the way, are furious, spitting mad about having to go back to work. This is a perfect place for the Department of Government Efficiency to begin its work. Lay off the employees who won't go into the office. Now, listen, I have friends of mine. I can think of two people who work for the federal government who work from home now. And they actually moved out of D.C. to Tennessee. And they can do their job remotely. And their quality of life has improved. And their children are happier. Their costs for schooling, they're now in a good public school. They were paying for a private school. Their entire world has improved by moving remotely to Tennessee and continuing to work for the federal government. I love them, and I say this lovingly. You would be a great addition to the private sector in Tennessee if you get laid off, because you don't want to go back to Washington and work in an office. Some people will say that's cruel, but first of all, we need employees within the private sector. We need good quality people. These are great people. They've got great jobs, great benefits in the federal government, and they don't have to work in D.C. I think it's time for employees to go back into the office. I hate to be that guy. Oh, that guy. I'm going to be that guy. Our world is arranged around people going to offices to work. I have worked out of my home for a decade, more or less, actually longer than that. Since 2005, I worked from home, and I only moved back into an office in 2022. And I got an office, and I would go about once a week, twice a week. And since I've got my own space now where I'm doing my show today, about 15 minutes from my house, I go less to my primary office, but I still try to go once, usually on Thursdays. And then I can bake in dinners and breakfasts and all the meetings I need to have and FaceTime with people and still do my show. And I enjoy it. I totally enjoy it, but also people. Our entire industrial life is built around commercial property. Businesses pay rent. Employees come to those offices. They get their work done and they go home. Our road infrastructure, our sewage infrastructure, small businesses in those areas. We're talking about a complete revolution and upending of civic society if none of us go back to the office. And we saw the fallout from that after COVID. But also, I do believe that most people will perform better in the office. I say this as someone who worked from home for a very long time. My efficiency by being in an office where I'm not dealing with my wife and kids and errands around the house and little distractions is much better. When I worked from home, rarely did I have my show completely fleshed out by the time the camera goes on. Today, rarely do I have my show fleshed out by the time the show starts, but I used commercial breaks to figure it out. I didn't then. I was winging it. It's way better in the office. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm a professional, though. I can do it. But government in particular, I don't have as much sympathy for government workers who are on my tax dollars. If you as a private business owner decide that you, private business owner, think that it's fantastic that your employees can work from home, God bless you. My employees all work from home. All of my employees work remotely. I am the only person who every day goes to an office to work, and I works for my business. But if you're the government, you're you're using my taxpayer dollars, and the fact that most government employees think they're entitled to work from home, no, you're not entitled to work from home. We got a new president coming in. The president is the chief executive officer of the United States. If he wants you to go to the office and you want to fight him, you should be out of a job. If he wants you in the office, you should go to the office. He's the boss on behalf of the taxpayers. That's the way it works. Things that I do tend to do this more than other conservative talk radio show hosts is talk about not just politics and what's happening in Washington, but what's happening around the world, because I grew up overseas and I got an eye and an ear towards it and thoughtful because of it. And I just don't think that a lot of you can appreciate, who did not have the experience I had growing up in the Middle East, what it means to be an American. There are a lot of people who just take it for granted that you're an American, whoop-de-doo. You don't understand what it means to have an American world order. You don't understand what it means to have other countries understand that if you're an American citizen, they better watch out for you. But also, in some countries, it puts a target on your back. There was a time growing up in the Middle East I very distinctly remember as terrorism was on the rise, plane hijackings were on the rise, Iran and Iraq were fighting, Hezbollah tried to blow up my school, that for a time, being Erickson and having a father who is Swedish, even though he's born and raised in Florida, my parents told me, my mother in particular, tell people you're Swedish. More often than not, though, you wanted people to know you were an American. It is a sad and damning fact about the Biden administration that multiple hostages held by Hamas are American citizens, and this president has done nothing. When you think about the American citizen held back in the day prior to World War I in northern Africa, and Teddy Roosevelt's message was they wanted the American citizen alive, even if it meant that the person holding him was dead. And the American citizen was rescued alive. It should mean something to be an American. And many Americans these days just want to withdraw from the world stage and say it doesn't affect us. But we live in a globally integrated system, and the question is who's going to be in charge of it, us or the Chinese at this point? The Chinese and their friends. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. We can't undo the world order. All that can be undone is us within the world order, and I don't want to see that happen. But unfortunately, we're steps closer to that happening because of the seeds of destruction sown by Barack Obama. Again, I don't want to make this about politics, but you do have to understand the background. A decade or so ago, civil war broke out in Syria. When I was a kid, I went to Syria. I have been to Damascus. The Assad family has ruled Syria with an iron fist for generations. Hafez al-Assad was the father of the current leader, Bashar al-Assad. Hafez al-Assad died. His son is not quite the man his father was, although they're all ruthless. And they, in the 1980s, in the Cold War, were aligned with the Soviets and have always been aligned with the Soviets. When the Soviet Union fell, they maintained their ties with the Russians, but also because of the Soviet largesse was gone, they built ties with Iran. Part of the reason they built ties with Iran was because the guy next door to them, who you all know, Saddam Hussein, was the leader of the Ba'athist Party of Iran. For a time in the 60s and 70s, Syria and Egypt united as one nation. Ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and the Ba'athist Party. The Ba'athist Party, Hafez al-Assad was the leader of the Ba'athist Party of Syria. Saddam Hussein, the leader of the Ba'athist Party in Iraq. And they coveted each other's territory. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Iran and Iraq hated each other, so Hafez al-Assad got into bed with the Iranians because he was the leader of one Ba'athist party, Saddam Hussein the leader of the other. They rivaled each other for control. They began to hate each other, so Syria began to ally with Iran and the Soviet Union, while Iraq maintained fairly Western ties, although we were always deeply suspicious of him because we knew the sort of man he was. The Ba'athist Party is the Arab Nazi Party. The Muslim Brotherhood had ties back in the day to Hitler and the Nazis. The Ba'athist Party was a formal political party. And by the way, before someone texts me again, because I got this the other day, Ba'ath, like bath water, Ba'athist, not Baptist. The Ba'athists, they will dance. The Baptists, they will not. The Baptists and the Ba'athists both say they don't drink, but they both do. But the Ba'athists actually will dance in the streets, and the Baptists, God forbid they're ever seen dancing. People think they're having an epileptic fit. The Ba'athist Party is tied to the Nazis. The leaders, the original leaders of the Ba'athist Party, were trained by the Nazis, and they were their allies in the Middle East. They hate the Jews. Hafez al-Assad was able to balance territorial interests in Syria and tribal interests in Syria and rule with an iron fist. His son is not the father. Civil war broke out about a decade ago in Syria when Barack Obama was president of the United States. Barack Obama, you must recall, does not believe in American leadership in the world. Barack Obama actually believed that the United States was a destabilizing force in the world. And if the United States would humble itself and treat itself as just one of 198 countries on the planet, instead of being the leader of the Western world, the world would have peace. Now, you should understand that it is absolutely quintessential textbook world history and geopolitical dynamics that the most unstable period of time on planet Earth is a multilateral nation-state system. There are three systems on planet Earth. There is the hegemon. That is, you have the Pax Romana, the Pax Britannia, and the Pax Americana. When the Romans were in charge of the world was at peace. When the British were in charge of the world was at peace. When the Americans were in charge of the world, twice it's been that case, the world has been at peace. We are the only nation that has at two times been the global hegemon. Right after World War II and right after the Soviet Union fell. So you have a hegemonic role, you have a multilateral world, and then you have the superpower dynamics, two competing countries with spheres of influence. And that's actually more stable than having every nation unto itself. Barack Obama perversely believed that every nation unto itself working together diplomatically would bring the world peace. And in the history of the world, that's never been the case. So when the Syrian civil war started, Barack Obama wanted to protect American interests, but he refused to pick a side. He helped certain rebels and then at times would withdraw support. He would bomb the Syrian government, but it was very much a limp-wristed, effete response to the Syrian regime, which, again, is allied with the Russians and with the Iranians and with Hezbollah, a proxy state of Iran. Barack Obama never gave thought to how we could win this thing. And part of the problem was he didn't want to disrupt our relationship with Turkey because Turkey wants to be a regional hegemon and Turkey doesn't like Russia. Turkey doesn't like us right now. Turkey increasingly is looking like a Muslim fundamentalist state, even though historically it has not been. The Turks hate the Kurds. The Kurds are our allies. The Turks hate the Armenians. The Armenians had been our allies. Now the Russians have co-opted them because we didn't help them enough. So we're helping the Muslims of Azerbaijan, and we've joined the Turks with that. It's all a messy situation, in large part because Barack Obama did not want to provide moral clarity. The war continued through the Trump administration, and the Trump administration put American forces in Syria to undermine the Russians. We weren't at war, but we were protecting our military because one of the major fighters on the opposite side of Russia and Syria was ISIS, and we wanted to stop ISIS. But also the Russians wanted to hurt us. So Donald Trump was fine, and the media, of course, thinks that Donald Trump was in Russia's pocket. Donald Trump authorized Americans to kill Russians in Syria, and we did brutally so, beautifully so, frankly. The Russian special forces in Syria surrounded an American position, and we wiped them out, and that gets very little coverage in the press, but it's a true story. It gets very little coverage in the press because it would undermine the narrative that Donald Trump was in Russia's pocket. Well, along comes Joe Biden, the successor to Barack Obama, a man who Barack Obama's own Secretary of Defense said is wrong about every major event in foreign policy in the last 50 years. And Joe Biden has not had a clue what to do with Syria. So here's where we are, I regret to inform you. The Syrian government is now on the verge of collapse. The Russians have used their influence with Syria to maintain a Mediterranean port, warm water port, out of Syria. The Russians are now recalling every Russian citizen in Syria, telling them get out immediately. The Russians are closing their embassy and they're moving their ships out of port. There is a rumor the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, and his family have fled. And the rebels have taken over Aleppo, Hama, and other major cities. Here's a problem. Let's go back to Barack Obama. Barack Obama didn't want to take a leadership role. Barack Obama looked on disdain to the Syrian rebels. He refused to pick a side among the Syrian rebels, even though there were pro-Western rebels. His argument was that if he picked a side, it would embolden Russia and Syria, and it would embolden Middle Eastern leaders against that particular rebel group if he picked a side. It wasn't true, but that's what he hid behind. The media bought it. Well, guess what? The most Western of the rebels are now being wiped out by the Turks, and so guess which group is now leading the rebellion and taking over Syria? That would be what Barack Obama called the junior varsity al-Qaeda, ISIS. That's right. Anti-Western terrorists are on the verge now of taking over the entire country of Syria, all because Barack Obama back in the day refused to give any moral clarity to the idea of having some Western sympathetic rebels in charge. Joe Biden and his idiot foreign policy team has only made the situation worse. And so now you will not be surprised to learn the Israelis are thinking they are going to militarily have to build a buffer zone off the Golan Heights further into Syria to protect them from radical Islamists who are on the verge of taking over Syria. This is now going to spur a humanitarian crisis into Europe, which is already dealing with a refugee crisis, as more Syrians, including those friendly to the Assad regime, have to flee from ISIS and the bad terrorists. We had an opportunity to exercise American leadership, and we chose not to. And for all of you who are isolationists out there, who continue to believe we should cede the world stage to our enemies, this is what happens. Syria is on the verge of being taken over by ISIS because we refused to act. It's not neocon, it's not nation state building, but we could have tipped our hand towards one of the rebel groups and allowed them to become the dominant party and worked with our supposed allies, the Turks, to make it happen. But we chose not to. So all the consequences and all of the fallout are going to be bad for us now because Barack Obama and Joe Biden sat on their hands and did nothing as this nation descended into civil war and now is failing. Penny's jury in New York appears to be a hung jury. The jury has told the judge that they cannot reach any level of reconciliation. They informed the judge that they cannot come to agreement on whether or not Daniel Penny should be convicted of manslaughter. That's good because in a progressive city like New York, it's probably going to be hard for Daniel Penny to be found not guilty. But having him have a hung jury is the second best thing that could possibly happen. This is from the New York Times from 2:22 p.m. Jurors in Manhattan sent a note on Friday to a judge overseeing the Daniel Penny trial, saying they have come to an impasse on whether he was culpable in the choking death of a disturbed subway passenger last year, leaving unresolved a case that's come to exemplify New York's post-pandemic struggles. After 3 days of deliberations, the jurors, 7 women and 5 men, wrote to the judge saying, "At this time, we are unable to come to a unanimous vote on count 1, manslaughter in the second degree." Justice Wiley, the judge in charge, responded by reading the jury an Allen charge, officially instructing the jurors to resume their deliberations with the goal of reaching an agreement through the reconsideration of different opinions. It is not uncommon for juries to believe they will never be able to reach a unanimous decision. I'll ask you to continue deliberations on that count. Justice Wiley said he had to decide if a unanimous agreement was impossible on the manslaughter charge before considering if the jury could move on to deliberating the second charge, criminally negligent homicide. For those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm just going to read you this section of this New York Times story. Prosecutors claim Daniel Penny, who had been in the military, choked the subway passenger Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old former Michael Jackson impersonator who struggled with mental health, when he held Mr. Neely in a chokehold for 6 minutes on the floor of an F train on May 1st, 2023. Neely had boarded the train that day and begun yelling at passengers, according to witnesses. As he strode through the subway car, he shouted about being hungry, saying he wanted to return to jail and that he did not care if he lived or died. Mr. Penny then approached Mr. Neely from behind and put him in a chokehold, taking him to the floor. Prosecutors say Mr. Penny's actions were not accidental and that he failed to recognize Mr. Neely's humanity, squeezing his neck tighter as he struggled to break free. They argued Mr. Penny's chokehold had killed Mr. Neely, pointing to testimony from the New York City medical examiner. Mr. Penny's lawyers argued his client's actions had not been the direct cause of Mr. Neely's death, instead suggesting it was a toxic combination of synthetic marijuana use, sickle cell trait, and mental illness that had killed him. The reality is that the people on that train did not dispute that they were in fear that Mr. Neely was going to harm them, and Mr. Penny saved them. There was a book published in 1939 called The Control of Language, A Critical Approach to Reading and Writing. It was referred to by some as the Green Book because it had a green cover. The book taught that that values are subjective and that statements about value are expressions of feeling. C.S. Lewis responded to the idea that all values are subjective and we're just stating our feelings with a book called The Abolition of Man. The very first chapter is called Men with Chests. And in the book, C.S. Lewis wrote this: the operation of the Green Book in its kind is to produce what may be called men without chests. It is an outrage that they should be commonly spoken of as intellectuals. This gives them the chance to say that he who attacks them attacks intelligence. It is not so. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill in finding truth, nor any virginal ardor to pursue her. Indeed, it would be strange if they were. A preserving devotion to truth, a nice sense of intellectual honor, cannot be long maintained without the aid of a sentiment which the authors could debunk as easily as any other. It is not excess of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. Their heads are no bigger than the ordinary. And all the time, such is the tragic comedy of our situation, we continue for those qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice or creativity. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand its function. We make men without chests and expect them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. We tell men to restrain themselves. We tell men to suppress all their emotions and their right and their wrong and use some objective strain of reason or some subjective strain of reason. And then we wonder, why won't people, when they see someone being attacked in the street, help? Along comes Daniel Penny, a man who still has his chest, and saves the passengers of that train from being assaulted by an insane man high on synthetic marijuana. That man dies while in police custody, not under Daniel Penny's care. And Daniel Penny is pinned as the bad guy. He's prosecuted for saving the people on the train. Erick Adams is the mayor of New York City.
To do something, and New Yorkers have always had the spirit and energy to come to their fellow New Yorkers, and we have to be honest about the severe mental health crisis that we're facing. In no way I want to do anything that's going to make the jury decision harmful in any way. He was going to be judged by a jury of his peers. They're deliberating. Let's let them do their job.
But here's the problem with the entire prosecution. As Erick Adams points out, people in New York are always told, if you see something, say something, take action to defend your neighbors. Daniel Penny did, and he's being prosecuted for taking action to save his neighbors. Who are your neighbors? Your neighbors are the people around you. They're not just your physical neighbors who live next door to you. They're the people in your community around you. Daniel Penny was an outsider who came into New York City, saw a crazy man on a train who was going to harm people on that train, and he took action to save those people. And those New Yorkers are now potentially trying to make him the fall guy. He's been prosecuted by the prosecutors in a city with a massive crime wave where they're allowing the criminals to get out of prison and they're prosecuting the good guys, keeping people safe. In New York City, they want men without chests. They want men without chests. They want men who are not men. They want men with no compulsion to do right because they don't want them to know what's right unless the elites get to tell them what is right. Daniel Penny should have never been prosecuted. And yet here we are with this situation. It is an abomination of justice that the bad man is treated as the victim and the hero is treated as the bad man. And yet that's what's happened in New York City. Those people, if they find Daniel Penny guilty, they will get exactly what they deserve when from here on out, no one is willing to stand up. And probably even after this, even if the case is thrown out because of a hung jury, they will find fewer and fewer people willing to help. They will find fewer and fewer good men willing to do what must be done to keep people safe, because that's what New York City wants, is bad men going free and good men being punished.